Welcome to Meet the Leader program. Today, we are lucky to be in Norway, and we'll be talking to the former Prime Minister of Norway, Dr. Gro Brundtland. And thank you very much, Madam, for granting us this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Madam, you came from a background whereby your father was a medical doctor and a cabinet minister. How much do you think your childhood experience contributed to your leadership aspirations and skills?
Well, in my home and in my family, both my parents were social democrats. They were activists. They believed in human rights, in equal rights for men and women. They were progressive in every sense of the word. And I grew up in that kind of atmosphere, wanting to change society for the better, to overcome inequalities, and to have a fair and just society. That influenced my whole childhood and my youth, the way I thought.
You yourself, you are a medical doctor, Madam, and you spent 10 years in Norway public health system, both as a scientist and as a practitioner. And you chose to went to politics. What were trade-off?
Well, you see, I was interested in making my contribution to improve society through public health. That was the choice of my profession. I never decided to become a politician. I was asked by the Prime Minister at that time to enter the cabinet. He called me one day. I was 35. So I never made any kind of deliberate choice to become a politician. I was picked by the Prime Minister to make a contribution and to be part of his government. You can say he wanted to have a woman, an additional woman in his cabinet. It happened, the choice became me, a young 35-year-old doctor. And I saw very quickly how I could do much more for public health and for society by being part of the political leadership of Norway.
In 1991, you became the Prime Minister of Norway. At that time, what was your vision for this great country?
I became Prime Minister in 1981, which is 6 years after I became Environment Minister in 74.
Yeah.
By that time, long before this, already 75, the Labour Party elected me deputy leader, which meant that, as I entered into the early 80s and became Prime Minister and the leader of my party, my ambitions for the party program and my own opinions, of course, were identical. It was a more equal, more fair and just society. It was moving the rights of women forward, because even in Norway in 1981, there were still differences in the opportunities and the rights of women compared to men. So our program was a social program to improve conditions for all groups of society and to overcome inequalities.
Do you think this vision was properly understood by your co-leaders and public at large at that time?
Basically, I think yes, they were. We had we had the Labour Party on the left and the Conservative Party on the right, and the debates between us were very focused and very strongly also followed by the Norwegian people. In 1981, in fact, we lost to the Conservative Party, but 4.5 years later, we were back in government. So we had a change in the early 80s like that.
How important do you think for leader is vision to be understood by the general public? Do you think that's very important?
I think it's very important. Of course, public debate in a democracy between the different opposing parties and leaders is an essential part of any democracy. If you don't hear your leaders debate between them and have a chance to make your own opinion, you don't have a real democracy. So it's an essential part of a well-run democracy.
And what were the leadership lessons that you picked as you were implementing your vision when you became the Prime Minister?
You know, an important thing is the television age. I mean, now we have to go 30 years back in our thinking. But then the television was a key part of any home in this country already, of course, and it was dominant in creating people's opinions. The strength of the TV medium was something I had to learn. If you, as a woman then, that's important too, if you are a woman in that situation and you show energy, you may even show, you know, some emotion or frustration or something in your debate style, then that is acceptable for a man. Nobody reacts to it. But in a woman, I had to learn to be more careful because people were used to having women softer, not so, you know, aggressive, in quotation marks. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting thing of my own experience. To convey that leadership in the most effective way, I had to take into account how the media and how people responded to the difference between a woman and a male leader.
Was age also a factor that perhaps brought a lot of challenges to you? Because at that time you were at age of 41 as the Prime Minister, the first woman Prime Minister in Norway. What were the unique challenges that...
Yeah, you know, I was the first woman Prime Minister and also the youngest Prime Minister ever. So you are right, I was young. Mm. But you know, at 48, you are grown up. And I had already then been 6 years in the middle of political leadership in my country. I didn't feel too young, but I do think that my opponent, he was 12 years, he was a man, 12 years older than me. You know, you could use the fact against me that I was young and that I was a woman. And it was done by opposition parties. So, but others felt it was young, it was fresh, they appreciated a woman. So it depended on, you know, which part of the public you reached.
At a global stage, Madam Dr. Brundtland, you were very keen on sustainable development. Actually, you were one of the architects of this concept of sustainable development, because in the year 1983, you were picked up to establish and chair a commission for environment and development. What motivated you to take up this position then?
You know, fundamentally, at that time, of course, I had been environment minister for 5 years, in the end of the 70s. Yeah. And I had already gained quite considerable also international experience. Then I became Prime Minister. So when the Secretary General called me to do this difficult task, and I said, look, I'm opposition leader. I'm leader of my party. I really cannot put all that into it because I knew it would absorb a lot of time over several years. He said, but you are the only environment minister who have become Prime Minister. That's why it's you I need. And I realized I had no alternative to tell him. There was no other with that kind of background. So I had risen and grown from being an environment minister to a Prime Minister. And I knew all the links in the whole of the economy with regard to sustainable development. I realized I couldn't give him another solution, so I had to try, and I did. And it was tough for those years because I had to travel quite a lot internationally. And then, of course, the opposition used that against me, that I was not always in Norway. It happened I was in Tanzania or I was in New York, you know, with my colleagues in that World Commission. So everything you do can be criticized.
Yes.
But in the end, I know I did the right choice of taking the challenge the UN gave me, because it has had a great impact, not only in this country, but globally.
In 1989, when you came back for the second time, you lost election to the Conservative Party. Were there specific lessons you picked as a result of losing that?
You know, what happened was that we took over again in 1986 in an economic crisis. Yeah. The Conservative Party couldn't manage, and we had to take over in 86. Yeah. Now, during those years, from 86 to 89, to deal with this economic crisis, took a lot of difficult decisions as political leaders. So we had to tell people that we cannot now grow. It's not possible until we have overcome our debts, overcome the imbalances in the economy. So we had to do difficult political decisions. Now, over those years then, the opposition said we can do better, and they won in '89. But it took only a year, and we were back. Why? They didn't manage. Now, then as you look forward, as the years passed then, the consequences and the positive developments coming from the policies we did in the 80s came. Norway became more prosperous. We had an improvement in the economy, and then we won in '93. So it's a question of, how much the voters see the challenges. They can be used also by the opposition as long as you are in a struggle to improve things. Sometimes you can lose, but you have to do the right thing. We chose to do the right thing, and long term, it was the best for the country and, of course, for the Labour Party's then success in the next election in '93.
You came back for the third term as Prime Minister, and you finished it in 1996. If you look back, Doctor, are there different type of leadership during your 3 terms, the first term, second term, and third term? And why did you decide to leave domestic politics at the end of 1996?
Yes, yeah. Now, of course, you learn, things change, you learn, you get a little older, but fundamentally, I think my principles of leadership remain the same, although, as I say, I was 15 years older when I left compared to when I started in '81. Now, why did I leave in '96? I decided 15 years of leadership in the party, and more than 10 of those in the country, is probably the right length. It's better now for my successor to be, the next leader, to take over as Prime Minister. So I did that decision, privately, really, because at that time I had a very high standing. I was very popular in every opinion poll. Nobody expected me to leave. I was kind of on the top of a curve. But I also knew that sometimes it's right to leave while you are doing a good job, instead of standing, wanting to keep to power, which is not a good thing. So it was a personal decision, and I think it was the right thing to do.
Knowing what you know now, and if you go back, what thing could you have done differently as a Prime Minister? Maybe one.
It's interesting. I don't think there is any big issue of any kind that I feel now we should have done differently. Sometimes when you are a leader of a democratic party in a democratic country, you are not a dictator. You have to analyze how great following and how much convincing you can make to make the steps that you think are right. Now, if, for instance, we lost the referendum on Norway's participation in the European Union, that happened in '94. That was the second time the Norwegian people said no to join Europe. Now, was that something? I can't regret that we tried. I think it was the right thing to try. It is also the right of the Norwegian people to finally decide. So, should I have done differently? I'm not so sure. I think it needed to be done. And of course, today, no political party or leader in Norway raised the issue, because it means that the Norwegian people is not ready for it. And now with all the economic, financial problems, unemployment, etc. in Europe, it certainly is very hard to convince a Norwegian population to change us, not being members.
In 1998, you accepted the position of Director General of World Health Organization, WHO. taking a center stage at international management of WHO, and you look at managing the country, are there major differences in managing international organization and managing the country that perhaps you have experienced?
I would say there are more parallels than differences, because it amounts to leadership in both cases. You have to have followers. You have to be convincing. You have to be able to point the way forward and to have people rally around you, or at least accept a common direction. Now, the world has 192 countries. And so it's a large group of countries that need to go together. So that leadership profile is a little different. However, the principles are the same. You know, if you are able to move forward, you have to do it with having at least a majority of countries behind you, and to convince those who may be opposed that they may stand back and accept that a big majority of countries want to move forward. That is maybe easier to do in the World Health Organization than in the UN General Assembly, where you have the Security Council and strong, you know, countries that are permanent members. So I think it's even worse to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. But in the global health area and global development area, we could do a lot to raise the effectiveness of health and development efforts globally.
Was there any major crisis that you have to dealt with in your leadership, and how did you come as a winner out of that crisis?
When I think back over all those years, Norway had on the Norwegian continental shelf a blowout in the North Sea in 1977. At that time, I was Environment Minister and Deputy Leader. And in fact, I was the one that took charge of dealing with Phillips Petroleum and dealing with what needed to be done and decisions, etc. You know, for 9 days, I nearly didn't sleep. It was a kind of full day and night effort. But we succeeded, and after 9 days, that blowout was capped. That was a crisis situation that really required intense leadership. And the whole world, I mean, the international journalists were in Stavanger, everyone watching what Norway was doing. So that was a real training also in meeting the international, you know, challenges of the international press. Now, that's one example, which was early in my time. I think the way we did it and the way we succeeded in the crisis probably was part of why I became Prime Minister 3 years later. Who knows? But, you know, that was one such. Then we had the economic crisis in the middle of the 80s and on into the early 90s. It was very challenging to deal with, because you had to tell people the truth, that although we have been growing year by year in our wages and our economies as families and citizens, we probably now have to kind of stand still for some years while we repair the challenges to the Norwegian economy. And that was tough. But we did succeed, although it took years.
You left the public office, but you're still very active and full of energy in area of health, the environment, and some other activities. What do you think is the role of former head of states when they leave public office?
You know, I made a decision in '96 then, when I left here, that I did not want to be a kind of elder stateswoman to comment on running affairs in Norway, because I think that role for an elder stateswoman or statesman is not so good. Because the people who are in charge, the people who are now younger, taken over on a political scene, should be left to do their job. Now, so when I took on the challenge of the World Health Organization, it meant I moved to Geneva, and I was out of the hair of the next leader of my party. Now, then, after 5 years in Geneva, I thought the same way. Let me spend my time and energy on helping on international issues. Not get mingled into Norwegian policy. This country is doing well. The party leader is doing well. You know, the prime minister is my party, and so on. Now, so it was this kind of decision to spend your knowledge, energy, and be able to help improve international relations and international development. That's how I've been thinking. Now, then I was called in 2007 by Nelson Mandela to be one of the elders. He called together the elders under the leadership directly of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And so during the time from 7 now until 13, much of my time has been spent on trying to get to help the elders be helpful, you know, in crisis situations, and in being a voice on behalf of the poor, on behalf of human rights, on behalf of fairness and justice in the world. So that's one way. We are all former leaders among the elders. And of course, in those years from 3 to 7, I worked for the United Nations as a special envoy on climate change, because that's another major issue that the world is facing and is not dealing with in the way it has to.
Doctor, in your view, what makes a good leader?
Well, certainly, first of all, integrity, consistency, values, the right values, but also courage. You have to be able to stand up. You have to be able to believe in your own opinions, and that's part of being, you know, having integrity. Unless you have all those qualities, I think you can never be a leader that is able to look forward and to take the right decisions also long term, and which is what sustainable development is all about, by the way.
Which leader or leaders provided personal inspiration to you, and how they influenced your personal thinking?
You know, the Norwegian labor leader in the post-war years, for many years, Einar Gerhardsen, he was kind of my mentor, the one I looked up to. Then there was, and this is interesting when you think about the difficulty in the Middle East and the Palestinian-Israeli question. But if you go back to the 40s and early 50s, Golda Meir was a woman who led a country. And I saw that she had the courage to act like a prime minister should. And it meant a woman can lead like a man. It has nothing to do with today's, you know, discussions about the Middle East. But she was a figure that really showed that women can be leaders. Now, so that was a second. Then it is Nelson Mandela. And long before he called me in 2007, he was my hero. And as he had left prison, or not left, well, at least he was allowed to go out of, for, you know, a year or two before he then was released. He was in Norway in a conference. So I met him first time in 91. Very impressed. We had a breakfast meeting down here at the SAS Hotel. Left a lasting impression. Then I was in Robben Island with him, the first foreign visitor to be taken out to see his prison cell and so on. Very impressive.
Do you think African leaders experience challenges which are somehow different from leaders from developed countries like Norway?
I certainly think they have. You know, they have greater disparities. They have poverty of a completely different nature. They really are struggling with things that politicians in this country struggled with 100 years ago, you know, and which are harder to overcome and challenging ones. And so to create a growing economy, but based on human rights, democracy, and an inclusiveness in your policies, that you can not only generally overcome poverty, but reduce inequalities and create a just and fair society. That's a big challenge in poorer countries. Now, I mean, all the money that is being taken out of African countries from extracting businesses or other international companies working in Africa with tax evasion, tax havens, and not to speak of also internal corruption in most or many African countries. That's an uphill struggle and hard work for any leader. But I think any African leader today, they know, they are aware of the kinds of things I am speaking of now.
Dr. Brundtland, in your closing remarks, what advice will you give to young, aspiring African leaders, both men and women?
You know, if you want to be contributing to your society, you have to think, what qualifications do I have? What passions do I have? Who am I? How and where can I contribute? And if you follow those thoughts and see, and you have to be yourself. You know, you cannot be a product of someone else or being told what to do unless you are inspired from internally, you know, in your own convictions and values. I don't think you can become a leader, and you're not going to give good contributions. So, you know, follow your own inspiration. There are so many interesting challenges everywhere around that any young person can take, you know, hold of, and then work on that and see, where can I make a contribution? I think that also creates happiness.
Viewers, thank you very much for watching this interview. I'm sure you've benefited a lot. Remember, today we were in Norway talking to the former Prime Minister of Norway, Dr. Gro Brundtland. Dr. Brundtland, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.